to More Living with Jim Brogan, your source of information for living the best years of your life your way. For more than a decade, host Jim Brogan and his expert guests have come together each week to share important news and advice that can impact the lives and well-being of those who are retired and those nearing retirement. Learn about issues like health and fitness, financial planning, Social Security benefits, investment advice, and more. And now, here's the host of More Living, Jim Brogan.
Good morning, East Tennessee, and welcome to More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. This is News Talk 98.7 WOKI on this Memorial Day weekend. So much is going on. And I know the coronavirus has changed almost everything about our daily normal life. If and where we go back to work, how often we shop, deciding to get only takeout food for a celebratory meal. And the health crisis has impacted our lives, and it has certainly made an impact on our local economy and the U.S. economy and even the global economy. And so I have a very special guest with us this week, my friend, Dr. Harold Black. He is going to discuss the impact of the coronavirus on our economy. I'm going to talk about kind of where we are now, where are we likely to go, and even I want to get into a little bit the long-term implications of the federal actions that we're seeing right now. Dr. Black is a professor emeritus at the University of Tennessee, retiring after 24 years of service. He's a former James F. Smith Jr. professor of finance. He's known as one of the country's leading scholars on monetary systems. Good morning, Dr. Black. How are you today?
Hey, Jim. I'm doing great. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. It's so good to talk to you again. Boy, there's so many things we'd like that I could... Go ahead.
I just want to be rather than over the phone.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
I just said I wish our meeting could be face-to-face as opposed to electronically.
Yes, I do as well. That human contact is so nice. Well, as soon as we start getting out again, I definitely want to get together with you in person. Dr. Black, let's just kind of dive into some of these things. This economic downturn is so unique, because, this hasn't been caused by cracks in the financial system or the banking system, or, we're not resetting the markets. It was caused by a life crisis with the healthcare pandemic. Can you give your overview on, it's really remarkable. Almost 1 in 4 American workers now are unemployed. What is your overall view of this situation where we are today right now?
Where we are, actually, from different perspectives. One is we're still within this learning curve. We keep learning more and more and learn less about this particular virus. What we did initially when we shut down the economy was to stop this transmission, which appeared to be very, very facile between human beings. And we didn't know a whole lot about the virus. But this shutdown of the entire economy and all basic travel except for goods and services is, of course, responsible for almost a 25% total unemployment economy, going through what will be a recession, which is 2 quarters of negative growth. Japan is already in an official recession, and it's something that basically is worldwide. And personally, I think almost worldwide there's been an overreaction, but this overreaction, I think, is justified because of this lack of knowledge about this particular virus. But it has had really devastating economic impact on individuals, on companies, and on the country.
Now let's talk about the government reaction. Of course, the government is telling us to stay home, has shut down the economy. It's a very unique situation in our history. So we've had really two significant rounds of stimulus in Congress with the CARES Act and then another package totaling almost $3.5 trillion. What is your evaluation of the stimulus packages? I mean, how effective do you think they've been? Do you think they've been targeted like they should have? I'm sure it's like anything else. You probably see some good in there and some bad, but what are your overall opinion of what the government has done?
Well, first off, let me say this. Governments generally do not plan very well for the next crisis. And one of the reasons, of course, is you don't particularly know what that crisis is going to be. As you probably know, there were all sorts of hospital reserves in equipment at both the state and federal level that actually lapsed. And so indicating, of course, that none of the governments, regardless of where they were located, were prepared for a health crisis of this magnitude. The same is true with the fiscal part of government, in other words, the legislative part. And the CARES package was hastily cobbled together and thrown out there, hoping that it would stick. And so it has things like this extra $600 benefit for those people who are out of work. And it's estimated that well over 30% of the people who get that money are actually getting more money being unemployed than they are being employed, which means that for a lot of people, there will be a disincentive to going back to work until that money runs out. I think that's one of those one-size-fits-all benefits that probably was not well thought out. The $600 may have made sense in New York City, but it probably didn't make much sense in Bessemer, Alabama. And so one of the problems with all these bills is that it's the one-size-fits-all, and generally in that case, the one size may not fit none as opposed to all. So I don't think it was very well crafted at all. But it was one of those things in which the federal government said, well, we've got to do something. We've got to show the people that we care. That's why it's called the CARES Act. And that we need to do something. So let's do something, even if it's not the right thing to do.
Yeah, and, I hate that the timing of this, with this being an election year, it's become so political, and and I don't want to, we're not going to get into politics today, but the question I have for you, Dr. Black, is, there's this difficult balancing act of the health cost and the cost of lives from the healthcare pandemic, but then there's also the economic impact and the lives that can be destroyed based on the economic impact. What is your view of the importance of being able to balance those two things? I mean, it's a very, very difficult thing from my perspective of how to balance those two things.
Well, you're absolutely, totally, completely right. The only political statement that I'm going to make is that I wonder what happened to the loyal opposition, because before we've come together as a country, regardless of political strife, to deal with important issues. For instance, 9/11. 9/11, we all came together. I don't care if you were a Democrat or a Republican. They all supported that war resolution, all backed initially what the administration was doing. In this case, there's not one instance in which the opposite party to the party in power was supported. They were critical from the very beginning. They're critical now. They criticized the president for acting too soon, and now they're criticizing him for not acting soon enough. And somehow we're going through a period in a time in which we ought to come together. It appears that we're fracturing further apart. As far as health is concerned, all the statistics I've seen, Jim, point to the fact that even though this is a pandemic that spreads very quickly, that the overall mortality impact is less, much less, than other things that occur in the society, such as the common flu. A lot more people may get sick, but not a whole lot more people die. And that's one of the things that we're seeing, and that we have to come to some realization that this, just like every single other coronavirus, is going to be with us for a while. I mean, I've read studies that say that the Spanish flu virus of 1918 is still with us today. And so we're just going, it's going to be the new normal, the new reality, that we're just going to have to learn how to deal with these things.
Yeah, I agree with that. Tell you what, we're visiting with Dr. Harold Black. We're talking about the coronavirus and the short and long-term economic impact of everything that's going on. When we come back, I want to get a little bit more into where we're likely to head in the short term, 6 months, 12 months. What does he see as far as potential recovery? How do we reconcile what the stock market has done since March with what the economic news that we're getting? I've talked about this at length on this show. I want to get Dr. Black's, I'm going to get him to weigh in as well. So stay tuned as we visit with Dr. Harold Black here on More Living with Jim Brogan, only on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
You are listening to More Living with Jim Brogan. During the week, Jim is a financial advisor, an author, and speaker with an MBA from the University of Tennessee, who specializes in helping people in or near retirement plan for the next phase of their lives. You can reach Brogan Financial during the week at 865-862-6800 or on the web at broganfinancial.com. And now, here's Senior Market Advisor Magazine's 2011 National Advisor of the Year and host of More Living, Jim Brogan.
Welcome back to More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I'm your host, Jim Brogan, and we're visiting with Dr. Harold Black, and we're getting him to weigh in on his thoughts of where we are right now economically and where we're headed in both the short and the long term. And I do want to mention quickly before we get back to Harold that I have just now offered recorded an on-demand webinar called Keep Calm and Retire On. And it's a 30-minute webinar, and it evaluates, where are we now? How do we put this in the context of history? How do we understand what's going on? What are the different options of where we're maybe headed? And then maybe most importantly, what do you need to be doing? If you're already retired, what should you be doing? If you're retiring in the next year or so, what should you be doing? And if you're retiring in 3 to 5 years, what do you need to be doing? It is an on-demand webinar. It's complimentary. If you go to my website at broganfinancial.com, click on the webinar tab up on the top menu bar. Again, broganfinancial.com. Click on the webinar tab, and you can register, and you can watch that webinar. It's about 30 minutes, got some good slides in there, visuals to show you some perspective of where we are, what we've been experiencing, where are we likely to go, what are the different possibilities. So I would urge you to do that because ultimately, if you have a plan in place and get a plan in place to deal with short-term volatility, which is inevitably going to happen in markets, I believe you can still be very successful with your plan. And whether this takes 6 months to recover or 2 or 3 years, you can still be very, very successful. So do check that out at my website. Dr. Black, let's get into the different types of, there's been a lot of discussion of the economic recovery curve, and there's been letters used for that. Will it be a V recovery, meaning the the market goes down, or the economy goes down sharply, hits a low point, and then comes back up sharply? Or will it be more of a U where it takes a little bit more time? There's been talk, will it be an L where we never really come back all the way? What are your thoughts? How do you see this evolving in terms of the economic impact? Do you think it's going to be a quick V recovery, or do you think it's going to be choppier than that?
I don't really have a crystal ball, but let's talk about history. In history, the sharpest recoveries have occurred when there has been less government action to soften the downturn. Now, that's sort of a harsh reality, but that's what history shows. In the last downturn we had, in 2008, we had a non-recovery. People were actually using the term growth recession for the years 2008 through almost 2015. It was a very, very slow and prolonged recovery. And the recovery really didn't start in earnest until the end of the last administration, the beginning of this. One of the things that we talked about earlier was that the government, from the legislative standpoint, did all of this stuff in haste. And some of it will retard the recovery. The Federal Reserve, on the other hand, had gone through this sort of thing in 2008 and went into and learned quite a bit from that recession, and went into that bag of tricks and brought out virtually every single tool that they used back in those days, but then a couple of new wrinkles that I think are interesting and actually will ultimately be more important than some of the things that they've done. But I really believe that if we open up the economy and try to get the whole mechanism started back, it's going to take some time. And Jim, one of the reasons, of course, that it will take some time is that a lot of the businesses will not make it through this period, and will not make it through even the opening up of the economy. For instance, if you restrict the number of tables in restaurants, if you restrict the number of seats in movie theaters, if you restrict the number of folks in hair salons and tattoo parlors, it may well be that will not be enough for those smaller businesses to survive. And by the way, if you could figure out why most of retail closed in the first place, and yet other places like the big box stores were allowed to be open, I would like you to educate me. But I don't believe the recovery is going to be very, very sharp. I think it will occur, but it'll be a lot more gradual because we're going to have to adjust to firms failing and then new firms coming on board.
Yeah, I agree with you on that completely. It's kind of interesting. I'm going to get into the Federal Reserve here in a minute, but, there's this, one of the things I've talked about many times, I've talked about it on both Phil Williams' show and Bob Yarbrough, and I've been talking about on my show is, we have these just horrific economic numbers coming out, especially with unemployment, and yet the stock market has rallied substantially from the market bottom in late March. And the fact that the market is more of a forward-looking instrument. The market, to me, seems to be putting a lot of faith in the Federal Reserve. And as you mentioned, the Federal Reserve has pulled out all its tricks. Do you think that's what's happening with the market with investors? Do you think maybe it's a little too optimistic with the way things have rebounded? We've made up half of the losses, roughly, a little over half of the losses since the market bottom in late March.
That's really an interesting observation, because within recent history, the market has sort of led the panic, if you will. And that's not true for this one. We always said in the classroom that it's just exactly what you said. The markets are forward-looking and evaluate a firm on how they think the future is going to look. And the current stock price is some weighted average of future expected stock prices. So those companies that are expected to be around and doing well in the future, they should not see an adverse impact on their stock price. Those firms that are not going to do very well, then those are the ones that whose stock price should suffer. In this instance, the market, for one of the first times that I can remember, has been consistently optimistic about what the future is going to hold, and that's what it shows. It's had less volatility over the recent months than it had initially, as it's getting used to, I guess, the new normal. But I am like you, and that is, I wonder if this optimism is going to pan out, whether it's going to be short-lived or not. And I really do think that it's going to be highly dependent on what the recovery is going to look like. That if the market thinks that the recovery is going to be long and slow, I think we're going to see an overall fall in the price of stock. There's one thing I do want to point out, Jim, and I'd like to point this out anytime that I can, and that is when the market was falling, all the headlines said, this is a huge sell-off in the market. Well, in order for there to be a sell, there has got to be a buyer. And so for those people that are pessimistic, there are people out there that see this as being a good buying opportunity because they can go out and purchase stock at a price lower than what the market would suggest otherwise, because the underlying value of the firm actually has not changed. But like I said, the market is showing optimism, and once again, it's one of the few times in my life that I've seen this.
We're visiting with Dr. Harold Black today and talking about the economic impact that we're seeing. And when we come back, I'm going to get a little bit more into the long-term implications on our national debt. The Federal Reserve also has been basically provided this huge backstop to corporate America. They've really bailed out a lot of bad bonds that have been on the books with corporate America. What are the long-term implications of the Federal Reserve stepping in and bailing out companies? In a capitalistic society, what are those implications? Also, we'll have our dollars and cents segment. How can you take advantage of tax planning amidst market downturns and with some of the provisions of the CARES Act? So don't go away. This is More Living with Jim Brogan on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Through his weekly radio show, television news appearances, and adult education classes taught at the University of Tennessee and Pellissippi State Community College, Jim taps into his extensive knowledge and experience to address issues important to living your best retirement. Join Jim every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI, and visit him online at broganfinancial.com. And now, here's the host of More Living, Jim Brogan.
This is More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. And I want to thank you for tuning in on this Memorial Day weekend here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. We're visiting with Dr. Harold Black, Professor Emeritus
from the University of Tennessee, and we're talking about the implications of on the economics of all of this and our federal reaction and what the Federal Reserve is doing and the Congress and all of those implications. Before we do get back to Dr. Black, however, it is time for Dollars and Cents.
Want to be sure you are getting the most out of your retirement? For all the years of your retirement? That's the primary goal of More Living with Jim Brogan and our Dollars and Cents segment, where we provide you with an important financial tip that will help positively impact the quality of your life in retirement. And now, here's Jim with this week's Dollars and Cents tip.
How can prudent investors and those with retirement financial plans, whether you're retired now or in the future, how can you actually take advantage of some opportunities due to the market dip and the CARES Act? So, tax planning, income taxes for most of us is the largest expense you and I will ever have in our lifetime. And reducing income taxation is a key part of a successful financial plan, especially in retirement. You have more control of your income taxes in retirement than at any other time in your life. And there are some unique opportunities that can be presented here in 2020. And one of those opportunities is looking at the possibility of Roth IRA conversion. Now, Roth conversions were up substantially in the first quarter. People taking traditional IRAs and converting them to Roth. If you take $50,000, you convert it to Roth, you pay income tax on the $50,000 now, and then 5 years after that conversion, that money is income tax free forever. So look at the different layers in here. One, stock markets are down, investments are down. So if you're converting now for the same amount of money, you're converting more shares of investment because the market is down. So you're taking advantage of those reduced prices to get a better deal on the income taxes now. And then later on, that money is income tax free. And then we've also got the added element of where are we going with our income taxes in the future? We have close to $23 trillion of federal debt. We're spending tremendous deficits to try to attack this economic downturn and effect of coronavirus. And what are the long-term implications of that? Where might our tax rates be in 10 or 15 or 20 years? So you not only can maybe consider Roth conversion on lower prices, you're also hopefully doing it in a lower tax bracket to where you might be in 10 or 15 years. Now, don't overdo this, but when Roth IRA works is when you do the conversion, you're in hopefully a lower tax bracket than later on when you take the money out. So for those working Americans, a lot of you, your taxable income maybe is going to drop substantially. So rather than have higher taxes later, you might have lower taxes later. So be careful with that you don't overdo that. But those of you with large IRA balances and 401k balances, once you're over age 72 and have to take minimum distributions, you may find your income tax rates, your taxable income is much higher. So it's a real opportunity now. And with the CARES Act, if you're 72 years or older, they have suspended the required minimum distributions for 2020. So now you have a 1 year window here where markets are down to be able to get discounts on your Roth conversion planning, and you're not having to take those taxable distributions. So maybe you can take advantage of that in a lower tax rate today to hedge income taxes in the future. So tax planning is so important when we have things like this happening. There's also tax loss harvesting and tax gain harvesting with how you use capital gains and capital losses in your tax planning, the ability to realize capital gains at maybe a 0% tax bracket, the ability to take advantage of losses. There's all kinds of things you should be doing. So when we have things like this happening, we should be looking for opportunities to take advantage of, not only from an investment perspective, but also from an income tax perspective.
That's our Dollars and Cents segment for this week. You can find this week's Dollars and Cents segment and others by visiting BroganFinancial.com.
Do check us out on BroganFinancial.com. You can also sign up to receive my just published on-demand webinar, Keep Calm and Retire On. With the right kind of financial plan and retirement plan in place, I think you can keep calm and retire on and successfully pursue your goals. I take 30 minutes in an on-demand webinar to talk about the context of what's happened, where we could be headed, what are the different scenarios that we could end up seeing, and what are the longer-term implications, and what do you need to be doing now to be successful. Go to BroganFinancial.com. You can click on webinar to get that on-demand webinar. We're visiting with Dr. Harold Black today, Professor Emeritus from the University of Tennessee. And Harold, I do want to talk about the national debt. Now, this is, of course, it's been a very popular topic among many people that have been concerned for years. I know you have an interesting perspective on our federal debt. You know, the government is throwing large amounts of money at this. So the debt is going to grow pretty substantially here. Now, the flip side of that is interest rates are lowest they've ever been in our history. So what is your thought on the long-term implications of our national debt and what we're doing right now and what those long-term implications are?
Well, Jim, you probably know I write an occasional article for the News Sentinel, and I've written on this a couple of times, one not so terribly long ago. And basically what I've said is this. What we teach in the classroom is that large amounts of federal debt causes something called crowding out. And that is that the federal government comes in, and because it increases the demand for funds, it crowds out the funds that are available to the private sector. And so in the longer run, the impact of increasing the federal debt is basically to slow down private capital accumulation and economic growth. That's a long-run implication. And we may have seen some of that occur in Japan, because Japan has one of the highest ratios of debt to income of any developed country, and that economy has basically been stagnant for the last 20 years or so. And Japan is basically a no-growth economy. And one of the reasons probably is its large, very, very large amount of national debt compared to national income. We're not there yet. And so we don't right now see that same sort of scenario, but we may well see it because of what we have done with the CARES Act and probably increased spending in the future. As you know, the president from the very beginning has talked about public works and infrastructure. And they say modestly that's going to be $1 trillion tag. And the people of the opposite party love numbers like that and have actually endorsed that sort of proposal. So the piling up of debt may cause, and probably will cause, long-term slow economic growth. So we don't have growth in real terms of 2 and 3% anymore, but we have economic growth less than 1% because of the debt and the resulting debt burden. And so that's what I see coming in the future.
And let's touch on the Federal Reserve as well. The Federal Reserve has just provided an enormous backstop to corporate America. And of course, they lowered interest rates to practically nil, and then they're doing, tremendous quantitative easing. They did bail out the corporate bond market in early April. I've been concerned for a couple of years of the corporate bond market and the amount of leverage in our U.S. companies that's happened over the last 5 or 6 years. But just if you could, Dr. Black, the impact of the Federal Reserve doing a backstop like that for corporate America in a country that is built on free market capitalism, how do we unwind that? Do you think there are some dangerous long-term ramifications that we've kind of had a pivot? I mean, you could argue that 1935, when Social Security was passed, we had a pivot in our basic economic foundation. Is this potentially another pivot?
I certainly hope not. What the Fed did in the last recession was it created these lending facilities, and it made it known that these were only short-term lending facilities, and certainly what the Fed did was it started to wind those facilities down, even though we were still in a period of very, very slow recovery. This Federal Reserve seems to be sending the same message. There's an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal that said that if the Fed hadn't stepped forward on March 16th, that the panic of March 15th may have led to an overall market crash. And so the Fed, by providing the backstop, particularly in the commercial paper market, probably, if one believes the Wall Street Journal, prevented an overall collapse in the market. And by giving the market an indicator that it would do whatever was necessary to provide the liquidity necessary to keep markets operating, that's one of the reasons we've seen less panic, less volatility, and now actually a recovery in the stock market.
We're visiting with Dr. Harold Black this morning, and when we come back, it is Memorial Day weekend. And Dr. Black has such a fascinating life story. And certainly we don't have time to get into all of his life story today. Harold, I may want to have you back in a few months and just talk about your life story, because it's so fascinating, and the way you've persevered, and especially early in your life, and it just is fascinating. I do want to get your perspective on Memorial Day and what it means to you. I want to share a couple of thoughts as well, so don't go away as we visit with Dr. Harold Black right here on More Living with Jim Brogan, only on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Thank you for listening to More Living with Jim Brogan. If you miss any of today's show or want to listen to it again, visit broganfinancial.com, where you can access the podcast and other educational materials to help you in your journey through retirement. And now, here's Senior Market Advisor Magazine's 2011 National Advisor of the Year and host of More Living, Jim Brogan.
This Memorial Day weekend here at News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I want to thank you for listening to More Living with Jim Brogan, the station's #1 weekend show. Thank you for helping make us the most listened to show on the weekend. Memorial Day, John 15, verse 13 says that greater love has no one than this, to lay down his life for his friends. Memorial Day to me is a time to honor and remember each of the men and women that have served our country faithfully. They were willing to give up their freedom and possibly even their lives for people they will never know. And the acts of selflessness and duty are what draw me to such respect and to pray daily for every man and woman currently serving our country, as well as those who are veterans and the families of those who have lost someone in war. Dr. Harold Black has a fascinating life story, and I just want to get, Harold, your perspective on Memorial Day and what it means to you.
Well, Memorial Day has different meanings for me. One, the very first meaning was because of the Civil War. My interest in the Civil War kindled by my father when I was 5 years old when he took me to Andersonville, prisoner of war camp. And the Gettysburg Address and Gettysburg, because those are the origins of Memorial Day. And I have spent many trips to battlefields, walking on what I think is hallowed ground, and thanking those Union soldiers who gave their life ultimately for me and my fellow Americans to be free. And so Memorial Day has always meant that to me. But now, for the past 25 years ago, it's acquired even a different meaning, and one that's probably more relevant to other people, and that is my dearest friend in the world, father was one of the Bedford Boys, one of the original participants on Omaha Beach. And,
wow.
And so I have delved into that. And I recommend to everyone Rick Atkinson's trilogy on World War II. I think it's better than Stephen Ambrose's account. But so that meant a great deal to me. I've visited, our nation's cemeteries. I went by the one on Lakeview the other day and saw the American flags in front of every single day. And I must admit that teared me up. I am forever thankful to everyone who has served this country in those capacities, and I think we treasure every moment of our lives because of the sacrifice that those people have given to us.
Absolutely. And, for me, Harold, my dad served in the Navy. My father-in-law was in the National Guard. I have a dear friend that was in the Marine Corps, a couple of really good friends that are brothers. Of course, every year, as you know, I support the Navy SEAL Foundation with their Tampa Bay Frogman swim across Tampa Bay. And so it's something that my wife and I are both extremely passionate about based on our own family backgrounds and the people we knew growing up and the tremendous patriotism we have and the appreciation for those that have served us and really many of which gave the total sacrifice. And as I mentioned earlier, that verse from the Bible that's so meaningful in John, chapter 15, verse 13, greater love has no one than this to lay down his life for his friends. Dr. Black, it's always so good to catch up with you. I hate we couldn't do it in person. I want to do that sometime soon. I hope you're very blessed this Memorial Day weekend. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us today on More Living.
Thanks a lot, Jim.
It's always great to visit with you. That's Dr. Harold Black, Professor Emeritus from the University of Tennessee. I hope you and yours have a very blessed Memorial Day weekend as we honor our fallen warriors and also pray for those currently serving and those who are dealing with issues from prior service to our great country. Today, we've discussed the economic impacts and the long-term implications of coronavirus, because greater wealth provides for more living so you can live the best years of your life your way. Have a blessed weekend. This is More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
The views expressed by Jim Brogan and his guests are not that of Cumulus Media. Any discussion of financial, legal, and tax planning strategies is not intended to be individualized advice and is general in nature. Always consult with your advisor for advice specific to your needs. This program's content does not represent a recommendation of any particular security, strategy, or investment by Jim Brogan or Brogan Financial Incorporated.